Happy Tuesday, Baker Babes. We're going to jump back into chapter 6 of Pippi Longstocking. Yesterday I had to stop it short because we were getting ready to Zoom. I didn't want to miss any of our Zoom time. So I'll catch up with chapter 6 and maybe dive a little bit into chapter 7 today. Chapter 6, remember, was she arranges a picnic. Oh, Pippi. And they had to find just the right spot. I think you have to try it too, she said to Annika, who was walking along beside her with a lovely flaxen hair, pink dress, and little white kid shoes. Oh, what was she trying to get her to do? Oh, she was trying to get her to squish into some water. I don't think Annika was really excited about that. Some other time, said the sensible Annika, and they walked on. Mr. Nielsen certainly can be aggravating, said Pippi. He's always doing things like this. Once in Arabia, he ran away from me and took a position as a maidservant to an elderly widow. That last was a lie, of course, she added after a pause. Tommy suggested that they should all three go in different directions and hunt. At first, Annika didn't want to because she was a little afraid. But Tommy said, "You aren't a fraidy cat, are you?" And of course, Annika couldn't tolerate such an insult, so off they all went. Tommy went through a field. Mr. Nielsen he did not find, but he did find something else. A bull, or to be more exact, the bull found Tommy. And the bull did not like Tommy, for he was a very cross bull who was not at all fond of children. With his head down, he charged toward Tommy, bellowing fearfully. Tommy let out a terrified shriek that could be heard all through the woods. Pippi and Annika heard it and came running to see what was the matter. By that time, the bull had almost reached Tommy, who had tumbled head over heels over a stump. "What a stupid bull," said Pippi to Annika, who was crying uncontrollably. "He ought to know he can't act like that. He'll get Tommy's white sailor suit all dirty. I'll have to go and talk some sense into that silly animal." And off she started. She ran up and pulled the bull by the tail. "Forgive me for breaking up the party," she said, and as she'd given his tail a good hard pull, the bull turned around and saw a new child catch on his horns. "As I was saying," said Pippi, "forgive me for breaking up, and also forgive me for breaking off." And with that, she broke off one of the bull's horns. "Isn't the style to have two horns this year?" she said. "All the better bulls have just one horn, if any." And she broke off the other horn too. As bulls have no feeling in their horns, this one didn't know what she had done. He charged at Pippi, and if she had been any other child there, there would have been nothing left but a grease spot. But, hey, stop tickling me," shrieked Pippi. "You can't imagine how ticklish I am. Hey, stop, or I'll die laughing." But the bull didn't stop, and at last Pippi jumped up on his back to get a little rest. To be sure, she didn't get much, because the bull didn't in the least approve of having Pippi on his back. He dodged about madly to get her off, but she clamped her knees and hung on. The bull dashed up and down the field, bellowing so hard that smoke came out of his nostrils. Pippi laughed and shrieked and waved at Tommy and Annika, who stood a little distance away, trembling like aspen leaves. The bull whirled around and round, trying to throw Pippi. "See me dancing with my little friend?" cried Pippi, and kept her seat. At last, the bull was so tired that he lay down on the ground and wished that he'd never seen such a thing as a child. He had never thought of children amounting to much anyway. "Are you going to take a little nap now?" asked Pippi politely. Then I won't disturb you." She got off his back and went over to Tommy and Annika. Tommy had cried a little. He had a cut on one arm, but Annika had bandaged it with her handkerchief so it no longer hurt. "Oh, Pippi!" cried Annika excitedly. Shh, whispered Pippi. "Don't wake the bull. He's sleeping. If we wake him, he'll be fussy." But the next minute, without paying any attention to the bull and his nap, she was shrieking at the top of her voice, "Mr. Nielsen! Mr. Nielsen, where are you? We've got to go home!" And believe it or not, there sat Mr. Nielsen up in a pine tree, sucking his tail and looking so lonesome. It wasn't much fun for little monkey to be left all alone in the woods. He skipped down from the pine and up on Pippi's shoulder, waving his little straw hat as he always did when he was very happy. Well, so you aren't going to be a maidservant this time," said Pippi, stroking his back. "Oh, that was a lie, that's true," she continued. "But still, if it isn't true, if it's true, how can it be a lie?" she argued. You wait and see. It's going to turn out that he was a maidservant in Arabia after all. And if that's the case, I know who's going to make the meatballs at our house there hereafter." And then they strolled home, Pippi's dress still going cloff, cloff, and her shoes going squish, squish. Tommy and Annika thought they had a wonderful day in spite of the bull, and they sang a song they had learned in school. It was really a summer song, but they thought it fitted very well, even if it was now nearly autumn. "In the jolly summertime, through field and wood we make our way. Nobody's sad, everyone's gay. We sing as we go, hola, holo. You who are young, come join in our song. Don't sit at home moping all the day long. Our song will swell through wood and dale, and up the mountain top as well. In the jolly summertime, we sing as we go, hola, holo." Pippi sang too, but with slightly different words. "In the jolly summertime, through field and wood I make my way. I do exactly as I wish, and when I walk it goes squish, 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 squish. And my old shoe, it's really true, sometimes chip and sometimes chew. For the shoe is wet, the bull sleeps yet, and I eat all the rice porridge I can get. In the jolly summertime, I squish wherever I go. Squish-o, squish-o." Chapter 7, Pippi goes to the circus. It's kind of hard to read this book because she talks in circles, I feel like. A circus had come to the little town, and all the children were begging their mothers and fathers for permission to go. Of course, Tommy and Annika asked to go too, and their kind father immediately gave them the money. Clutching it tightly in their hands, they rushed over to Pippi's. She was on the porch with her horse, braiding his tail into tiny pigtails and tying each one with a red ribbon. "I think it's his birthday today," she announced, "so he has to be all dressed up." "Pippi," said Tommy, all out of breath because they had been running so fast. "Pippi, do you want to go with us to the circus?" "I can go with you most anywhere," answered Pippi, "but whether I can go to the circus or not, I don't know, because I don't know what a circus is. Does it hurt?" "Silly," said Tommy, "of course it doesn't hurt. It's fun. Horses and clowns and pretty ladies that walk on the tightrope." "But it costs money," said Annika, opening her small fist to see if the shiny $half and quarters were still there. "I'm rich as a troll," said Pippi, "so I guess I can buy a circus all right. But it'll be crowded here if I have more horses. The clowns and the pretty ladies I could keep in the laundry, but it's harder to know what to do with the horses." "Oh, don't be so silly," said Tommy. "You don't buy a circus. It costs money to go and look at it. See?" "Preserve us!" cried Pippi and shut her eyes tightly. "It costs money to look? And here I go around goggling all day long. Goodness knows how much money I've goggled up already." Then, little by little, she opened one eye very carefully, and it rolled around and around in her head. "Cost what it may," she said, "I must take a look." At last, Tommy and Annika managed to explain to Pippi what a circus really was, and she took some gold pieces out of her suitcase. Then she put on her hat, which was as big as a millstone, and off they went. There were crowds of people outside the circus tent and a long line at the ticket window, but at last it was Pippi's turn. She stuck her head through the little window and stared at the old dear lady sitting in there. "How much does it cost to look at you?" Pippi asked. But the old lady was a foreigner who did not understand what Pippi meant and answered in broken Swedish. "Little girl, it costs $1.25 in the grandstand and 75 cents in the benches and 25 cents for standing room." Now Tommy interrupted and said that Pippi wanted a 75-cent ticket. Pippi put down a gold piece and the lady looked suspiciously at it. She bit it too, as if it was genuine. At last she was convinced that it really was gold and gave Pippi her ticket and a great deal of change in silver. "What would I do with all those nasty little white coins?" asked Pippi disgustedly. "Keep them and then I can look at you twice in the standing room?" As Pippi absolutely refused to accept any change, the lady changed her ticket to one for the grandstand and gave Tommy and Annika grandstand tickets too, without them having to pay a single penny. In that way, Pippi, Tommy, and Annika came to sit on one of the beautiful red chairs right next to the ring. Tommy and Annika turned around several times to wave to their schoolmates, who were sitting much farther away. "This is a remarkable place," said Pippi, looking around in astonishment. "But see, they've spilled sawdust all over the floor. Not that I'm over fussy myself, but that looks careless to me." Tommy explained that all circuses had sawdust on the floor for the horses to run around in. On a platform nearby, the circus band suddenly began to play a thundering march. Pippi clapped her hands wildly and jumped up and down with delight. "Does it cost money to hear, too?" she asked, "or can you do that for nothing?" At that moment, the curtain in front of the performer's entrance was drawn aside, and the ringmaster in the black frock coat with a whip in his hand came running in, followed by 10 white horses with red plumes on their heads. The ringmaster cracked his whip, and all the horses galloped around the ring. Then he cracked it again, and all the horses stood with their front feet up on the railing around the ring. One of them had stopped directly in front of the children. Annika didn't like to have a horse so near her, and she drew back in her chair as far as she could. But Pippi leaned forward and took the horse's right foot in her hands. "Hello there," she said. "My horse sent you his best wishes. It's his birthday today, too, but he has bows on his tail instead of on his head." Luckily, she dropped the foot before the ringmaster cracked his whip again, because then all the horses jumped away from the railing and began to run around the ring. When the number was over, the ringmaster bowed politely and the horses ran out. In an instant, the curtain opened again for a coal-black horse. On its back stood a beautiful lady dressed in green silk tights. The program said her name was Miss Carmencita. The horse trotted around in the sawdust, and Miss Carmencita stood calmly on his back and smiled. But then something happened. Just as the horse passed Pippi's seat, something came swishing through the air, and it was none other than Pippi herself. And there she stood on the horse's back behind Miss Carmencita. At first, Miss Carmencita was so astonished that she nearly fell off the horse. Then she got mad. She began to strike out with her hands behind her back to make Pippi jump off. But that didn't work. "Take it easy," said Pippi. "You think you're the only one who can have any fun? Or other people have paid too, haven't they?" Then Miss Carmencita tried to jump off herself, but that didn't work either because Pippi was holding her tightly around the waist. And that the audience couldn't help laughing. They thought it was so funny to see the Miss Lovely Carmencita held against her will by a little red-headed youngster who stood there on the horse's back in her enormous shoes and looked as if she had never done anything except perform in the circus. But the ringmaster didn't laugh. He turned toward an attendant in a red uniform and made a sign to him to go and stop the horse. "Is this number already over?" asked Pippi in a disappointed tone. "Just when we were having so much fun." "Horrible child," hissed the ringmaster between his teeth. "Get out of here." Pippi looked at him sadly. "Why are you mad at me?" she asked. "What's the matter? I thought we were here to have fun." She skipped off the horse and went back to her seat. But now 2 huge guards came to throw her out. They took a hold of her and tried to lift her up. They couldn't do it. Pippi sat absolutely still, and it was impossible to budge her, although they tried as hard as they could. At last, they shrugged their shoulders and went off. Meanwhile, the next number had begun. It was Miss Elvira about to walk the tightrope. She wore a pink tulle skirt and carried a pink parasol in her hand. With delicate little steps, she ran out on this rope. She swung her legs gracefully in the air and did all sorts of tricks. It looked so pretty. She even showed how she could walk backwards on the narrow rope. But when she got back to the little platform at the end of the rope, there stood Pippi. "What are you going to do now?" asked Pippi, delighted when she saw how astonished Miss Elvira looked. Miss Elvira said nothing at all, but jumped down from the rope and threw her arms around the ringmaster's neck, for he was her father. And the ringmaster once more sent for his guards to throw Pippi out. This time he sent for 5 of them, but all people shouted, "Let her stay! We want to see the red-headed girl!" And they stamped their feet and clapped their hands. Pippi ran out on the rope, and Miss Elvira's tricks were nothing compared with Pippi's. When she got to the middle of the rope, she stretched one leg straight up in the air, and her big shoe spread out like a roof over her head. She bent her foot a little so that she could tickle herself in the back of her ear. The ringmaster was not at all pleased to have Pippi performing in his circus. He wanted to get rid of her, and so he stole up and loosened the mechanism that held the rope taut, thinking surely Pippi would fall down. But Pippi didn't. She sent the rope a swinging instead. Back and forth it swayed, and Pippi swung faster and faster, until suddenly she leaped out into the air and landed right on the ringmaster. He was so frightened he began to run. "Oh, what a jolly horse," cried Pippi. "But why don't you have any pom-poms in your hair?" Now Pippi decided it was time to go back to Tommy and Annika. She jumped off the ringmaster and went back to her seat. The next number was about to begin, but there was a brief pause because the ringmaster had to go out and get a drink of water and comb his hair. Then he came in, bowed to the audience, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment you will be privileged to see the greatest marvel of all time, the strongest man in the world, the mighty Adolf, whom no one has yet been able to conquer. Here he comes, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to present to you the mighty Adolf." And into the ring stepped a man who looked as big as a giant. He wore flesh-colored tights and had a leopard skin wrapped around his stomach. He bowed to the audience and looked very pleased with himself. "Look at these muscles," said the ringmaster, and squeezed the mighty Adolf's arm where the muscles stood out like balls under the skin. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have a very special invitation for you. Who will challenge the mighty Adolf in a wrestling match?" Oh no, who do you think's gonna do it? "Who of you dares to try his strength against the world's strongest man? $100 for anyone who can conquer the mighty Adolf. $100, ladies and gentlemen. Think of that. Who will be the first to try?" Nobody came forth. "What did he say?" asked Pippi. "He says that anybody who can lick that big man will get $100, said Tommy. "I can," said Pippi, "but I think it's too bad too because he looks nice." "Oh no, you couldn't," said Annika. "He's the strongest man in the world." "Man, yes," said Pippi, "but I'm the strongest girl in the world, remember?" Meanwhile, the mighty Adolf was lifting heavy iron weights and bending thick iron rods in the middle just to show how strong he was. "Oh, come on now, ladies and gentlemen," cried the ringmaster. "Is there really nobody here who wants to earn $100? Shall I really be forced to keep this myself?" And he waved the bill in the air. "No, that you certainly won't be forced to do," said Pippi, and stepped over the railing to the ring. The ringmaster was absolutely wild when he saw her. "Get out of here! I don't want to see any more of you," he hissed. "Why do you always have to be so unfriendly?" asked Pippi reproachfully. "I just want to fight with the mighty Adolf." "This is no place for jokes," said the ringmaster. "Get out of here before the mighty Adolf hears your impotent nonsense." But Pippi went right by the ringleader and up to the mighty Adolf. She took his hand and shook it heartily. "Shall we fight a little, you and I?" she asked. Mighty Adolf looked at her and he didn't understand a word. "In 1 minute I'll begin," said Pippi, and begin she did. She grabbed mighty Adolf around the waist, and before anyone knew what was happening, she had thrown him on the mat. Mighty Adolf leaped up, his face absolutely scarlet. "Atta girl, Pippi!" shrieked Tommy and Annika so loudly that all the people at the circus heard it and began to shriek, "Atta girl, Pippi!" too. The ringmaster sat on the railing, wringing his hands. He was mad, but mighty Adolf was madder. Never in his life had he experienced anything so humiliating as this. And he certainly didn't intend to show that redheaded girl. He certainly intended to show that redheaded girl what kind of man mighty Adolf really was. He rushed at Pippi and caught her around the waist, but Pippi stood firm as a rock. "You can do better than that," she said to encourage him. Then she wriggled out of his grasp, and in the twinkle of an eye, mighty Adolf was on the mat again. Pippi stood beside him, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. With a roar, he was up again, rushing at her. "Tiddly-pom, piddly-day," said Pippi. All the people in the tent stamped their feet and threw their hands in the air and shouted, "Hooray, Pippi!" When mighty Adolf came rushing at her for the 3rd time, Pippi lifted him high in the air and with her arms straight above her, carried him clear around the ring. Then she laid him down on the mat again and held him there. "Now, little fellow," she said, "I don't think we'll bother about this anymore. We'll never have any more fun than we've already had." "Pippi is the winner! Pippi is the winner!" cried all the people. Mighty Adolf stole out as fast as he could, and the ringmaster had to go up and hand Pippi the $100, although he looked as if he'd much prefer to eat her. "Here you are, young lady. Here you are," said he, $100. "That thing," said Pippi scornfully. What would I want with that old piece of paper? Take it and use it to fry herring on if you want to." And she went back to her seat. "This is certainly a long circus," she said to Tommy and Annika. "I think I'll take a little snooze, but wake me if they need any of my help with anything else." She then lay back in her chair and went to sleep at once. There she lay and snored while the clowns, the sword swallowers, and the snake charmers did their tricks for Tommy and Annika and all the rest of the people at the circus. Just the same, I think Pippi was best of all, whispered Tommy to Annika. Chapter 8 is Pippi Entertains Two Burglars. I've seen the movie. It's a good one. And when she entertains two burglars in the movie, it's a pretty good show. Have a great afternoon, guys. Enjoy this beautiful weather.